Hey everybody, Pastor Greg here. I'm excited about life and I know that you are too because life is so good and it keeps getting better all the time. On behalf of myself, Pastor Yolanda, and the Celebration Spiritual Center family, I want to wish a happy Mother's Day to each and every one of you, the mothers that are watching, the grandmothers that are watching, and to each and every one of you that are watching, to your mom and to your grandmothers. We love and we appreciate you, and we are so grateful for the mother energy, for the nurturing energy that you have provided for each and every one of us. I want to make sure you all know that on Memorial Day weekend, which is May 27th, that Sunday, CSC will be closed. We will not be having services. However, if you happen to be in the Detroit area, I will be speaking at Renaissance Unity in Detroit. I would love to meet you. I would love to see you there. And then we will return back next month in June where our summer hours will begin. And so that means that service begins at 10:30 a.m. I look forward to seeing you all next Sunday or one of the following Sundays. Let's get into today's message. Oh my goodness, it's so good to be with you all. I want to get right in because we do have some things to cover as we are in our series Beyond Survival. Last week we started with the biology of choice. And I talked about, and we used Dr. Joe Dispenza's You Are the Placebo. We're going to deal and pull some things from that text as well today. But we looked at this idea of what's actually happening in order for us to make a choice, and what's also happening why many times it feels like we can't make a choice. And actually, there's some things that are going on biologically and chemically and even genetically within our bodies that many times prevent us from making the choices that we want to make. We're actually living from only 5% of our brain, and we're not able to access the 95%, which is the automatic subconscious programming that is actually causing us to continue to choose the same destructive habits or same destructive patterns over and over again. So we got to find a way to get into that 95% of the brain. Yes, yes? And so I talked about how we can move into a alpha brainwave state and a theta brainwave state. And actually, it's at that point that then we can begin to think a new thought, develop a new pattern of belief. I talked about, of course, Dr. Joe Dispenza and You Are the Placebo. He has a meditation that he teaches. You can also download the meditations, and he'll guide you through it. I shared you can use subliminal recordings. Subliminal Guru is the brand or the company that I use. I talked about Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. You can use his recordings, his sound recordings, which are beautiful. One thing that I forgot to mention, which is incredibly powerful and useful, is floating. Many of you know I'm a huge fan of the sensory deprivation float tanks. And actually, if you make that a regular practice, it's doing the same things where you're shifting your mind into a receptive brainwave state and actually releasing stress and healing your body. And then that brings you out of the fight or flight survival response. And you're now actually in the CEO of the mind, the frontal cortex, and you can actually choose, right? So there's so many other modalities. We could go on, but I do want to make sure that you all are aware of those. So as last week we talked about choice, this week we're talking about change. And I spoke to it and highlighted it a bit that Dr. Joe Dispenza tells us that when we're seeking to make a change in our lives, there's this river of change that we have to cross. Because actually what's happening, as I shared last week, we're actually changing biologically. I don't know if you realize that this is the truth of your life, but when you make a change, if you've made any profound change in your life, you biologically, chemically, and genetically are a different person. That can be measured. And this is then why it feels so hard to make choices. Because when we want to make a change, the pain that we feel is our bodies are changing. It's like the snake shedding of his skin, or I talked about the crab in molting season, or it's like the caterpillar going into the chrysalis and becoming something completely different. And so this is why so many people say that change is hard. But we recognize, as Joe Dispenza says in You Are the Placebo, that crossing this river of change is the biological, neurological, chemical, and even genetic death of the old self. That's what's happening. Now, he goes on and he writes, the gap between the old self and the new self is the biological death of your old personality. If the old self must die, then you have to create a new self with new thoughts, new choices, new behaviors, and new emotions. Entering this river is stepping toward a new, unpredictable, unfamiliar self. The unknown is the only place where you can create. You cannot create anything from the known. Hear that. That will change your life. I'm going to read it again, and we're going to come back to it later. But the unknown is the only place where you can create. You cannot create anything new from the known. Now, that makes sense practically, right? If you want to create something new, that means it doesn't exist, which means it's unknown. This is important for us to understand. Any change, any new choice, as you want to cross this river of change, be clear. It's the genetic death of the old self, right? And you recognize now that this new self that you want to create is unknown. But you can only create in the unknown. Each and every one of us were actually created in the unknown, in the darkness, in the unseen of your mother's womb. So you were created and nurtured and brought into being. That was in the unknown. As much as we have, all of the wonderful technology that we have, that we can, measure the heartbeat and sonograms and all these wonderful things, there's still a level of it being unknown, unseen, right? Until we manifest into this time-space reality. Okay. So the question is, how do we cross the river of change? How do we move from this old identity to the new identity? And furthermore, how do we do this with as little pain as possible? So last week we talked about accessing the 95%, right? We talked about accessing this part where the subconscious programming is. And so once we've done that, and that's through some type of meditative process, and again, you can use many different processes. Yoga, like if you do a 30-day yoga challenge, you will be a different person. Not just because your muscles will be cooler or you'll look, you'll lose some weight, but at every level, chemically, neurologically, biologically, and even genetically, you would become a different person. So the three things that are required to cross this river of change, and I would ask that you repeat after me. One is acceptance. Number two is belief. And the third is surrender. All right. We need acceptance, belief, and surrender. That's what's going to carry us across this river of change. And Dr. Joe Dispenza writes, the more we accept, believe, and surrender to whatever it is we're doing to change our internal state, the better the results we can create. And so as I thought about crossing this river of change, and as I thought about these three aspects that are needed, acceptance, belief, and surrender, it reminded me of a story that's written about our elder brother Jesus. And most of you, I'm sure you're familiar with the story. It's called the story of the stilling of the storm. This is the peace be still story. Y'all know the peace be still story? Right? And just in short, for those that don't know, Jesus and his disciples needed to cross a body of water. In one of the stories, it's called a lake. We don't know if it was a lake or a river, but in one story, it says a lake. And when they got midway, the storm came up, and it was a terrible storm. The storm was so bad, the water was coming into the boat. Jesus was at the bottom of the boat sleeping, and the disciples were freaking out. And they were freaking out so much that they woke Jesus up, because they're like, we need Jesus to do something now. This is terrible. And they were actually upset with him because he was asleep. And they say, Master, do you want us to die? Like, don't you realize that we have this storm going on and we could all die? Do you want us to die? He was very frustrated with them. And this was one of those, how long must I suffer with y'all? Like, y'all have seen me perform all of these miracles. You've seen all of these things happen, and still you're afraid of a storm. And so Jesus says, peace, be still. And the winds and the waves ceased, calmed, all was well, and they made it on their journey. Now, what I love about this story is the way that it's told. It appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but the way it's told in Mark and Luke is what I want to focus on. Because there's something that Jesus says in those tellings of the story that have everything to do with us crossing the river of change. Now, in Mark, it says, on that day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. In Luke, it says, one day he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, let us go across to the other side of the lake. So they put out. You hear what Jesus said? Let us go across to the other side. Jesus was clear about where he was going and did not talk about anything else in the middle of the lake or in the middle of the river. we can assume, being Jesus, he probably knew that there was a storm coming. He didn't say, let us go through this challenging storm. He did not say, let us go through this challenging storm. Let me get through this difficulty. Let me get through this relationship. Let me just deal with this job a little while longer. He said, let us go to the other side. He was clear about where he was going. And so that's all he talked about. And so I recognize that in this way, Jesus was demonstrating the acceptance, the belief, and the surrender. He was so surrendered that he went to the bottom of the boat and went to sleep. Now, what did the disciples represent? Well, of course, the disciples represent the fear, doubt, and worry. Same event, same process. They were all crossing over this body of water or the lake or the river of change. And it's interesting because in the river of change, inevitably, there will come some storm. Now, we know why. See, now, let's talk about this because we have made this into an idea of God as testing us. Oh, the storm showed up in my life. I'm in a peace be still moment. I got to speak peace be still over this storm. Something's happening. I got to be like Jesus and speak to the winds and the waves because God is trying to make sure if I really want this new life or if I really want this new husband or wife or if I really want this new business or if I really want to be wealthy, God is testing me right now. That's what's going on. That's why the storm is here because I said I want to cross the river of change, but we have some information now and we understand that when we're crossing the river of change, as Dr. Joe Dispenza says, it's the biological, neurological, chemical, and even genetic death of our old self. So what if all that's happening is you're shedding that old skin? What if the storm is here to support you in letting go of the old thoughts, old choices, old beliefs that created the old body that you're ready to let go of? What if that's what's happening? And we recognize that science 100% supports this. Thank God. And so what then is acceptance all about? Well, acceptance means that we have emotionally embraced the new desired outcome. And I've been thinking a lot about this in 90 Days to Greatness. We were talking about this on Monday night. Because for many of you, you may be familiar with the manifestation equation. I've taught on it several times and speak to it often, that what's required for us to manifest or demonstrate anything in our lives, it's based on this equation that Source kind of gave to me. And the acronym is TEAM, T-E-E-M, okay? T times E, thought times emotion, plus E, expectation, equals M, manifestation. TEAM, okay? And so here, acceptance, he's talking about the T times E. I love, as Napoleon Hill teaches us in Think and Grow Rich, that only thoughts which have been emotionalized are the thoughts that can actually manifest. That you can have a wonderful idea, but if it doesn't excite you, if it's not emotionalized, it actually can't manifest. Now, the other thing about that, we tend to emotionalize the negative thoughts, right? We tend to emotionalize the fearful thoughts. We get so full of it, we can feel it as though it were real, and then that is, of course, why we manifest it. So thought times emotion, we have to emotionally embrace this new desired outcome. And what's interesting about emotion, I love as we sang in the meditation, I am light, and recognizing that light is energy. That emotional equivalent of whatever your desired outcome is, it has an energetic signature that can actually be measured. And that energetic signature has to be a higher frequency than whatever the current energetic signature is of the old self that you're seeking to get rid of. That's why the emotion is necessary. Right? It's not just to be emotional or to emotionalize things, but it actually has a vibratory equivalent, a measurable vibratory equivalent that has to be more than the vibration of the old self. And then that's what disintegrates the old self. That's what actually signals our brain to then begin to create new neural pathways or neural networks. And that's what begins to signal our brain to now start to signal our body to create new proteins, to create new genes and turn off the genes that aren't working for us and turn on the genes that are working for us. That's what's happening. But then we have this second E, expectation. And I have to break out that E because that expectation is our desire, our belief, and what I've added is our acceptance. Because many times We may desire something. You may desire $1 million, but you don't believe that you can have $1 million. Right? You may desire a new position in your company, but you don't believe that people that look like you get that position. You've never seen a female director in your organization. So in truth, although you desire it, you don't believe it. But then acceptance, it's a similar thing, but it's nuanced, it's different. Many times we haven't fully accepted the idea. This is why, and where we get into the idea of you have to be thankful and grateful for something as though it is existing or already happened now. There has to be an acceptance that you realize and recognize that actually we live in an unconditionally friendly universe, loving universe. It's unconditionally loving, and it loves you 100% all the time, even though you've made some mistakes. And so because of that, then you're not holding yourself into some kind of jail. You're not making yourself a prisoner. You're not believing that you have to serve some penance before you can have your good, but you recognize that just as Scripture says that God doesn't look upon sin or doesn't see sin. In other words, it only sees and knows love. It can only look at you in that way. It doesn't see your mistakes. It can't. The Scripture is clear in 2 Corinthians, love holds no record of wrongs. And God is love. Scripture says that too. And so that means that God holds no record of wrongs. There's no need for forgiveness. The only need for forgiveness is us to forgive ourselves, to let ourselves go and be free. God does not forgive because God does not condemn. So when we understand that, now we can accept this love and accept that as we are loved unconditionally, then we can be, do, or have whatever we want. As Abraham Hicks reminds us so often, we can be, do, or have whatever we want. But so often we haven't accepted that. So often we don't really believe that. Because we think about the things that we did. We think about the things that we said. We think about the things that we may be ashamed of. We think about the times that we didn't live up to the highest version of ourselves. And so it can be hard for us to accept the good that is available to us. But this is what acceptance is all about. And this is what's required in order for you to move through the river of change. Jesus had accepted that he was going to get to the other side. Again, he said, let us go across to the other side. That was acceptance. He saw himself on the other side at that moment, although he wasn't even in the boat. That's acceptance. And then belief. I love the definition from Abraham, that a belief is simply a thought you keep thinking. And we understand biologically, if you read Dr. Joe's work, that what happens is then a belief actually creates a neural pathway, right? And your brain begins to fire according to a certain pattern based on that repetitive belief. And so then it feels real to you. It feels like it's fact to you. And it's interesting because I mentioned Napoleon Hill earlier, but what Napoleon Hill says I love. He says that if we understand that a belief is a thought we keep thinking, Napoleon Hill says that the repetition of affirmation of orders to your subconscious mind is the only known method of voluntary development of the emotion of faith. And faith and belief are intimately linked. So the only way to move into belief, you have to repeat affirmations of orders. I love that word, orders, orders, orders. Why? Because you are the commander of your life. See, until we know that, we're accepting the orders of every other general around here. We're accepting the orders of the general of the newscasters. We're accepting the orders of even the general of our mother and father or other family members. We're accepting the orders of those that say that black folks don't matter. We're accepting the orders of those that say that there is a glass ceiling that women can't break through. We're accepting the orders that say that we can't have this amount of money or this amount of prosperity or this amount of joy or this amount of good because one day the bottom's going to drop out. We accept the orders. But when you understand what's happening with crossing this river of change, the first thing you understand is I create and command my reality. And so you decide what it is that you want to be, do, or have, and then you repeatedly affirm these orders to your subconscious mind. Now, when Napoleon Hill wrote this, we didn't know about neuroplasticity. We didn't know that our brains can literally and do literally change. At the time that he wrote that, it was believed that by the time you reach your 30s or younger, your brain was fixed. That's what it was. But we know differently now. We know, and it's measured, and it's documented, and it's just basic fact in this time, space reality, that we can repeat orders to our minds, and our brain literally changes. So now I say, when you change your mind, you change your brain. And so you know that that's what's going on. So then you know that you're not just affirming these things for naught. 4T's class, when you're saying I am prosperous 100 times in the morning and I am prosperous 100 times at night, now you understand what you're doing. You're not just trying to make yourself feel good. It's not just an emotional exercise. It's not just some spiritual thing to do, but you are literally ordering your mind, commanding the cells within your brain to wire and fire differently than they were before. That's how we develop belief. And finally, surrender. And what is my definition of surrender? Surrender is extraordinary trust. Now, why is it extraordinary? Why does it need to be extraordinary? Because we're surrendering to the unknown. So when I say extraordinary, I'm not saying supernatural. I'm not saying that's something that doesn't already exist within you. But it's extraordinary in the sense that we understand that we're surrendering to something that we cannot taste, we cannot touch, we cannot smell. We're getting rid of this old identity and moving to this new identity that is unknown. I want to read again what Dr. Joe says. The unknown is the only place where you can create. You cannot create anything new from the known, so you got to surrender. You got to surrender to this unknown path, but recognizing through your acceptance and your belief, you know that you're not alone. Recognizing through your acceptance and belief, you know that you are loved unconditionally. Recognizing through your acceptance and your belief that you can be, do, or have whatever you want. Recognizing through your acceptance and your belief that there is something that is guiding you, even if you cannot taste, touch, or smell it right now. And guess what? It lives within you. Because it's the same thing that is keeping your heart beating. You didn't have to consciously think about that. It's the same thing that keeps you breathing. You didn't have to consciously think about that. It's the same thing that keeps your digestive system working easily and effortlessly. You didn't have to think about that. All of that is part of that 95%. And that's the life of God, the grace of God even, that's operating in, through, and as you. And so as I said earlier, I was reminded, as we were singing the song, I was reminded of where I was before that song came to me, and I was reminded of where I was when I wrote the song in my life and in my thinking. And, I was reminded of something that Reverend Michael Beckwith famously said and says so often, that pain pushes until the vision pulls. And I love to think about that as we're thinking about this river of change, because normally what brings most of us to the river is that pain. It's an unwanted experience. It's something that we didn't expect. It's something that might knock us down. And the only reason that is, Pastor Yolanda and I were talking about this yesterday, but the only reason that is because the voice of spirit is the still small voice. We know that, right? We've heard that, the still small voice. But it's only still and small for so long. Because the longer you ignore it, and this is actually incredibly loving, it gets louder. And the longer you ignore it, it gets louder. And the longer you ignore it, it gets louder. And then you're faced with a diagnosis that's unwanted. Or then you're faced with a devastating breakup. Or then you're faced with an injury. Or then you're faced with a job loss. Or then you're faced with bankruptcy. Or then you're faced with theft. It could be any number of things that it could happen. Now, for me, I remember at this time, there was a lot going on. I was moving through my divorce, and there were complications. Complications to the tune of the wonderful attorney that I had hired and given thousands of dollars to did nothing on my case and disappeared. We found out later that this is what she does with all of her clients. And so while I was in the midst of divorce proceedings, I now had to be party to her disbarment. And so there was a whole thing that was going on. All of us as clients had to be interviewed and discuss what went on. And I think, I don't know, there were five or six of us. And ultimately, she was disbarred, and then, we had to sue to get that money back, all that stuff. So that was going on. I had been in a relationship that was going well, and that relationship had ended. And the money that I had given to the attorney, that was all of the extra money that I had. So I found myself in financial difficulty, and I found myself getting behind in my rent. And I found myself getting a notice saying that you will be locked out, and if you cannot pay the balance, you will be evicted. I didn't have the money to pay the balance. I didn't know where it was going to come from. And at that point, it really felt like life was just crashing in on me. And as I, in my old school Pentecostal background, got a little fearful that, I must have done something wrong. And now God's judgment is coming upon me. And so there I am at the banks of the river of change. And there's something that I remembered that I said, because my apartment was gonna be locked. I would be locked out on Friday. So I packed up a suitcase and went to work that morning. But I remember as I was leaving my apartment, I said, well, it's you and me now, God. Now, why is that interesting? Because I ain't used that word. I was at a place because I was so knowledgeable. I was so heady. I had studied all of this wonderful work. And so, I didn't use the word God because I didn't associate with the negative Christian connotation of God, the judgmental God, the God that hates gays, the God that doesn't affirm women. I didn't rock with that God. I didn't like that God, so I didn't even use the word God. But I got to the river of change. Lord have mercy. I got to the river of change, and I said, well, it's you and me, God, now. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen or what I was going to do. I stayed in a hotel for that weekend, and I called a friend. I asked if I could crash on their couch. They said yes. And so I'm locked out of my apartment. I'm on my friend's couch, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I have this other legal matter going on. I don't know when I'm going to see my money back. And so a few days later, we were in, this month was the time that we would normally receive bonuses. But if you all remember, we had a recession. Y'all remember when that happened, and the housing crisis? And so there were a lot of people that were losing jobs. I was working in the publishing industry, and publishing houses were closing left and right, consolidating, closing imprints. And although the company that I worked for, we actually hadn't experienced layoffs, but we were told that nobody was getting a bonus. Like, you need to be happy that you're still employed, right? So I go to work, and my manager, he calls me in. He says, Greg, we need to talk. I'm like, okay, like, what else can happen, right? Y'all ever been there, right? Yeah. Just a quick aside. We say when it rains, it pours, and we use that negatively. You can use it affirmatively, too. So when the good starts showing up in your life, when it rains, it pours. I want to be soaked in this good. I want to be soaked in this prosperity. When it rains, it pours. When it rains, it pours, okay? And so he had this little Post-it, and he slides it forward to me. And it had a number on it, a dollar amount. He said, I know I told you that no one was getting bonuses. Lord have mercy. But you've done extraordinary work this past year. And I wanted to make sure that you were acknowledged for the work that you've done. the amount was more than what I needed to pay my back rent. And, I fought back the tears, and I said, thank you. And then I immediately went, I called the management office. I said, I will have this money to you tomorrow. And so I was able to get back into my apartment. Now, we would think that would be it, right? That was the end of the story, but that was just the beginning of the story. Because what I had done, I had finally accepted something and began to believe something, and I was forced into surrender. I didn't really surrender on my own. I was forced into surrender. And one of the things I realized when I walked back into my apartment, I said, I haven't been grateful for this place. Greg, do you realize how blessed you are? Do you realize how much you have? And what did I do? I went to my computer and I created these little be grateful signs. And I put them everywhere in my apartment. In my bathroom, I put it on the door so that when I would leave every morning, I would see and affirm that. Because I realized I needed to get into another space. I had been in this place of being closed. The other thing I did, it was very small, and I've shared this with you all many times. I began to just keep 3 single-dollar bills with me at all times. Because we see homeless folk all the time, right, asking for money. And I recognized, because I knew the principle, I learned this from a child. As you give, you receive. So I recognized my life felt so closed and all of this stuff was going on, but now I received this magnificent blessing. I need to give so that I can keep this channel open. And so anytime anybody asked for money, if I would have one of those 3 singles, I would give it. I wouldn't think about it. I wouldn't judge them. It didn't matter what they may or may not do with that money. I recognized that I needed to be in the flow, and so that's what I started doing. And then slowly but surely, what began to happen, I began to, at the time, I don't know if y'all remember the old bookshop, East West Books in Manhattan. I miss East West Books. But they used to have wonderful classes, and so I used to start going to the meditation circles. That's actually when I started meditating, because life was so crazy, I needed something. And what else happened? One of my coworkers, he was like, somebody gave me these meditation CDs. I don't know why. You want them? And I was like, yes. Right? As I'm crossing the river of change, all of these things were coming to me. As I was living in the acceptance and the belief and the surrender, these things were coming to me to support me in letting go of that old identity. And then I remember in the following year, because this was in 2008, so in early 2009, something profound happened. I can't tell you the whole story today, but through a wonderful set of events, I was introduced to a community, Sacred Center, New York. And being at Sacred Center had so much to do with being here now. Now, there's a number of things. Now, first of all, prior to that, I had studied Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, and that changed my life. It literally changed my life. My friends would see me, and they were like, what are you doing? You're different. There's something They just looked at me and saw that there was something different about me. And I remembered my best friend and we studied that book, and I said, I don't know why, but I feel like sometime next year I'm going to find a church. She was like, church? Aside from weddings and funerals, I didn't set foot in a church, right? Had gone to seminary, answered the call to ministry, 4th generation minister, all of that, right? But I had stopped going to anybody's church. She was like, church? I was like, yeah. I said, I don't know why. I said, but it's going to come to me. And it did. It came to me in a beautiful way. And one of the things that I heard Spirit say to me was, you're here for a moment and for a specific amount of time so that you can accept who and what you are. And so I dug in deep at that point. As soon as I heard about the 4Ts class, I couldn't wait to be in the next 4Ts class. And it was actually in the 2nd or 3rd week that this song, Toward Our Wholeness, that's when I wrote it. That's when I got hold of this idea, because now I was understanding what had been happening in my life the previous year. Everything that had brought me up to this moment, all of life is a movement toward my wholeness. That being locked out and almost evicted, it was a movement toward my wholeness, because it brought me to a recognition and an understanding. It brought me back to gratitude. It brought me back to recognizing and understanding that there's so much here for me. It brought me to the place of surrender. It brought me to the place of acceptance, that I was then able to continue to move across the river of change. And I went through that 12-week class. And at the end of that class, there was a sister. Now, in terms of my music, it was important for me to use my gifts and skills as a musician, and so I auditioned for the choir, and late that summer we had the retreat, and you bring in all the new members of the choir, and we start to learn music and wonderful things. And there was this sister. I had seen her only once before. Actually, when I first started coming to Sacred Center, I never saw her again. I kept looking. I didn't see her, you know. But she was there that day. She was in the choir, too. It's like, oh, this is good. And I remember we were on a break, and people were saying, talking about my audition. And they were like, oh, Greg, you know, he's really talented. He sang and he played, and it was such a beautiful song. We were all in tears. And they were like, go to the piano and, you know, do the song again, Greg. So I was like, okay. So as I'm at the piano, I'm trying to check to see if this sister is paying attention, right? Because, you know, I'm trying to impress her. I'm like, if she can see that I can play and sing, you know, right? She paid me no mind. None. So I was like, wow, okay, all good, right? So after I joined the choir, our director, dear friend Tony George, I sent him the demo. I said, I wrote this song during 4Ts toward our wholeness. I want to send you the demo. You know, if you think it'll be, you know, something that you want to use or want to sing, you know, you're the director. You know, do whatever you want, but you know, I think you might like it. He loved the song, and he said, I think that I know exactly how we should do it. Send the song to Yolanda. I want her to be one of the singers on the song. And I was like, okay, cool. This is perfect, right? Like now I have a reason to reach out and talk to her. Cool. And y'all can check in with her later. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what she said. But I sent her the song, and what she has said and shared with me is that it was just what she needed to hear in that moment, because she was also at her river of change. And she was also at that place of life pulled her to the banks of that river, forcing her to accept, believe, and surrender. And she was in tears. And I remember she emailed me back. She said, oh, my goodness, I would be honored to sing this song. I love this song. And I was like, yes. And so both of us in that moment were moving across this river. Here's the last thing I'll say. As you're moving across the river, it requires acceptance, belief, and surrender. But sometimes when you're going through it, 3 words, that's too long. The only thing you need to do to continue to move forward so that eventually the pain is not pushing you, but the vision is pulling you, is just say yes. At every moment, you just say yes. And our dear friend Carly Jackson, that's what she says about Yolanda and I. She said, y'all just be swimming in yes. And when I look back over our lives, when I look back over the 5 years, but then I look back from 2009 to now, it was a series of yes and yes and yes. And every yes was a yes to an unknown. Every yes was a yes to I don't know how, but there's something within me that is simply saying, let us go to the other side. The yes was something that was carrying us over and over. Let us go to the other side. Let us go to the other side. Let us go to the other side. When the idea of Celebration Spiritual Center came up, neither of us were working full-time nor had the funds to create what it is that we were feeling so strong, but it was an unknown. We said yes to it, knowing that we would be right here where we are 5 years from now, and knowing that we will be even further along 5 years from now, and 5 years from then, and 5 years from then. It starts with the yes, and it keeps moving with the yes. So as we recognize that all of life is a movement toward our wholeness, that movement requires your yes. And so I invite you to stand right here and right now. Mother, Father God, we are so grateful and thankful for this river of change. We are so grateful and thankful that there is a process by which we can let go of old thoughts, old habits, old beliefs, old ways of being, and can literally die to that old self to give birth, to resurrect, as the Christ does, to our new self. We are so grateful and thankful to realize that this is a process of nature. We see it all around us in the animal kingdom, and so it must be true in the human kingdom as well. And we recognize that we are so amazing and so fabulous that we get to move through that river of change over and over and over and over again. For we recognize that there is no ceiling to our good, and there is no ceiling to the good that we can become, the good that we can do, the good that we can have. And so at every moment of our lives, we are saying yes, yes, and we are willing, we are ready, and we are able to be good on the earth, to be God on the earth, to be great on the earth in the new ways that you are seeking to express in, through, and as us. We say yes to the new gifts. We say yes to the new skills. We say yes to the new abilities that are lying dormant within us. And the only way that we can bring them out is first to say yes to what we already know we can do. First, we have to say yes to what we already know where we have the capacity and the giftings to do. And as we do that, those gifts begin to rise up and express themselves in, through, and as us. And before we know it, we are now expressing a new gift. We are now speaking a new language. We are now expressing in a new way. For that is who and what you are. God, if you are everything and everyone at all times, and if you are connected and moving in, through, and as us, then we must have the ability. We must have the capacity. We must be able to express anything that we so desire in, through, and as these bodies. We recognize that there is no limitation upon us, and where there may seem to be a current limitation, we can turn on or off the genes to then create the new reality, to create the new experience. We can then fire in new ways within our minds to create the new expression or the new experience. We are so grateful and thankful to know that there is nothing about us that is fixed. There is nothing about us that is frozen. There is nothing about us that is stuck. And if you feel fixed, if you feel frozen in your life, if you feel stuck, I dare you to say yes. I dare you to say yes to that thing that you may have let go of because you thought you wasted too much time on other things, or that thing that you let go of because you feel like at my age now, or that thing that you let go of simply because you hadn't seen anyone that looked like you do it, or that thing that you let go of because you judge yourself. Why should I want to be wealthy? Maybe I'm being too high-minded. Whatever it may be, say yes to it right now. Say yes to that dream. Say yes to that vision. Say yes to that expression of yourself that is within you that's saying, let us go to the other side. Let us go to the other side. We are so grateful and thankful, Mother, Father, God, as we recognize the power of yes. We recognize this is the word that you speak over and over again, for the scripture teaches us that the things of God are simply yes and amen. Yes, and it is so. Yes, and so it is. This is what you are saying at all times. And so we recognize that as we tap into our God nature, that's why we say yes. That's why we say yes, yes. That's why we say, and so it is, to the idea. That's why we say yes, yes, and so it is to the new vision. That's why we say yes, yes, and so it is to the new dream. That's why we say, and so it is, and yes, yes, to the new family. That is why we say yes, yes, and so it is to the new business or the business idea. That's why we say yes, yes, and so it is to the new country we want to live in, or the new home that we want to live in, or the new space that we want to live in. That's why we say yes, yes, and so it is to the job change and the career change. That's why we say yes, yes, and so it is to the next degree. That's why we say yes, yes, and so it is to the master's degree and to the doctorate. And that's why we say yes, yes, and so it is to the certifications. And that's why we say yes, yes, and so it is to the new licensing. And that's why we say yes, yes, and so it is. And yes, yes, and so it is. We are living according to our divine nature. There is nothing against us, but all of life for us. We recognize and remember that. For the winds of God are blowing. Unfurl your sails. And let the yes of God within you guide you across this river of change easily and effortlessly. I release this prayer now with joy and thanksgiving. I release this prayer now knowing that the word that I have spoken never returns to me void, but it returns back to me like a boomerang, bringing gifts, bringing good, bringing joy, bringing love, bringing peace, and bringing the answer to my prayer to me easily and effortlessly. So now we watch, now we wait, now we look, now we expect, now we move into that vibration just like a child on Christmas morning, expecting the gifts to show up. Now we expect the gifts to show up in, through, and as our lives. And together we lift up our voices. We say amen. Ashe. And so it is. And so it is. Thank you, God.